Hey guys, and welcome to another video. So earlier in the week, I made a video where I got all giddy and excited about the potential of a Guild Wars 1 remaster, and I kind of just made it on a whim. But I'm happy to see so many of you guys also really resonated with that idea, and you were there in the comments, and there was a lovely Reddit thread all about it, and it was super interesting to read. So I'm kind of very into Guild Wars 1 at the moment, and there's sort of a follow-up conversation I wanted to have. Footage in the background, once again, is going to be kind of lazy. This is me doing my Z quests, which took me into the Catacombs of Cathandrax, took me out to one of my favourite maps, the Matani Keys, for vanquishing. There's actually quite a lot going on with my gear and my weapon swapping here, which I'm having a lot of fun with. One of the quests was also for the Domain of Anguish, so I did the Stygian Vale in hard mode, which was a real trip to go back to. I actually wiped the first time I went in there because I forgot to turn on my Lightbringer title, which means you do like 40% less damage in the area. Oof. But yeah, it's really mostly going to be unrelated. Hope that's okay. So yeah, in this follow-up, I want to talk all about the Guild Wars 1 20th anniversary. So obviously, one of the biggest arguments with that other video I did is, hey WP, these are all cool ideas, but why not just put them into the game as it stands? Because frankly, and as I mentioned in the commentary there, Guild Wars 1 actually holds up reasonably well right now in terms of rendering, the many QOL updates that have been implemented under SCW, who, by the way, was actually tagged as game director for the game in a recent wiki patch note. But most of those updates over the past 10 years have continued to make the game very, very playable. So why bother with a remaster? It's a bit like with the Guild Wars 3 idea, where, you know, if a Guild Wars 3 comes out and, you know, there's the rumor mill about that, well, wouldn't this just cannibalize people in the existing MMO? Isn't there a risk? It's the same thing with the Guild Wars 1 remaster. If you released that, wouldn't it just kind of kill the existing classic game? So hey, just add some real content there. It seems pretty clear that for one reason or another, ArenaNet really haven't been able to do very much with Guild Wars 1 under normal circumstances. But, except, hold on, coincidentally, we're talking about all of this right on the cusp of a Guild Wars 1 anniversary. And the anniversary event is the one time, even in these games' twilight years, ArenaNet have taken the time to add real meaty content. So, if you've been out of the loop, to recap you real quick, the first 5 birthdays for this game were basically while it was still being actively updated. The first 4 or so. And you got a birthday present every year with a new mini. Some of them were very rare. It was always so damn exciting to open those things. For the 6th birthday, the game was essentially on ice at this point while they developed Guild Wars 2, and they changed it up. They gave you everlasting tonics instead of mini pets. And then for the 7th, I thought it was going to continue being everlasting tonics, but no, they went back to minis again. Except this time, this was the final batch of minis. They added a bunch of previously exclusive magazine and competition-based minis, several of which were worth loads of money. Like, that's actually how I made my fortune in Guild Wars 1. I grinded the Domain of Anguish, I bought a mini Naga while it was cheap, and then I sold it later for loads of money as people realized, oh my god, there's only like 900 of these in existence, and they got more and more expensive. So for the 7th birthday, they added some of those exclusive minis back, albeit at a very rare drop rate. Like, they're still worth some good money right now. And they added like the Hound of Balthazar pet. For the 8th anniversary, that was when we were really transitioned into Guild Wars 2, and well, they basically threw in the towel with minis and the classic reward structure. Instead, and this is how it's been ever since, you get a voucher which you can spend on any of the previous years and kind of farm directly for the thing that you want. That was the 8th anniversary. The 9th, that was like truly empty. Nothing happened there. But then it was 10 years. And I didn't expect anything, but with the 1 decade, there was a big update. So this is 2015, by the way. As far as Guild Wars 2 is concerned at this point, we're at Heart of Thorns already. Then out of the blue, well, maybe not out of the blue, you could have expected with 10 years they'd do something special. In comes this big Guild Wars 1 update. They introduced this item, the Proof of Legend, which meant if you went back to the game during the celebrations and you just beat missions in various areas of the world, you would get big rewards. They kind of essentially said, hey, come replay Guild Wars 1 and you'll get very cool loot. Essentially, that was in the form of 2 new weapon sets. There were the Balthazar weapons, which are like perfect, inscribable, rare sets that are super useful for gearing heroes and for modding to your heart's content. Those are permanently in the game now. I actually just picked up some Balthazar weapons just last week. And then the Decade set, which was another new weapon set, and these were really weird rule-breaking gear with new mods. Like, they had these huge damage modifiers on them that would only be active during celebrations, which reads 20% more damage, but actually on, like, martial weapons, it's like a 40% damage modifier, because it's armor penetration. So, they added a bunch of weird, wacky, cool new things. Like, there were wands that looked like swords, they had flashy particle effects, just changed it up and made these weapons that people really wanted to go for, and reinvigorated the game. They also gave you a free storage panel, the anniversary storage panel, and a couple of rewards for PvP. So that was the Decade update, and we went on ice again. And once more, I didn't expect much, maybe nothing ever again. But for the 15th, well, they returned. Now, you might remember this. Christ, I remember making my video on this like it was yesterday, okay? The 15th anniversary went bigger, and it is actually, in my opinion, the single best update for Guild Wars 1 in years, like since the bonus mission packs release. The 15th anniversary was again another weapon set, and this time they played around more. They gave us weapons with totally weird attribute requirements, like for cross-profession combos, like you'd get a bow that required crit strikes, a scythe that required soul reaping, a shield that required fast casting. That one's actually ultra OP, and you can see I'm playing with it in the footage in the background. Like, if I swap to my shield set, just enemies instantly detarget. It's amazing. And so on. So, now, those were obviously motivated to be referential to Guild Wars 2 Elite specs. Like, you have the Scythe Necro, the Reaper reference, and the Mesmer Shield is a Chrono reference. But it actually ended up having a very real and fun impact on buildcraft that super invigorated me at the time, and it invigorates me now, messing around, say, with even this shield in the current footage that you can see. It was a very cool part of the update. But that wasn't it. Secondly, and most significantly, they added new skills. And obviously, Guild Wars 1 is built on its buildcraft system and access to skills, so new skills is major content as far as Guild Wars 1 is concerned. These weren't just skills, they were elite skills. PvE elites, there were 10 of them, one for every profession. Now, the icons tended to just be reused and muddy-looking assets from Guild Wars 2, because I think a big issue with Guild Wars 1 updates for them right now is art and stuff, so they just took those out of Guild Wars 2, and they were pretty uneven. Like, the Elementalist one is awful, and remains awful to this day. I still maintain that the Ellie one should be removing Overcast from your skills while bonded, not building it. There's actually an amazing discussion page over on the wiki for all these skills where people have been talking about how balanced they are and how well they worked, and cool ideas for the devs. Well, I don't know whether they'll ever actually read them. While some of the others are like ludicrously, insanely overpowered, like the Paragon one, essentially creating a new tier of super elite skills all on their own. So it was kind of uneven, but for a really late game patch, really amazing. A cool update that totally refreshed PvE, changed PvX wiki, and with what really felt like kind of a small touch. And since then, well, we've been on ice again. Again, aside from the other, like, QOL updates that have been coming into the game. So I want to talk about the anniversary again now, because we are on the cusp of a very big one. We're fast approaching the 20th. Okay, well, technically, actually, there's one in just a couple of weeks, which is the 19th, and then the 20th is following right after. So you get where I'm going with this. The question is, since they did a bunch for the 10th, the 15th, what could they do this time? So, Guild Wars 1 is still getting updated with content, guys. It's just on a 5-yearly schedule. It's totally legit. And those Guild Wars 2 guys with their multiple in a year are just spoiled. So, seriously, I thought it might be fun to speculate. We could throw our voices out there in the comments, because you never know. With a year to spare leading into this, it might give the studio a chance to see what people are talking about and figure out what titillates people. So, without further ado, here are a few of the things I think worth discussing. Alright, first, there are the really massive pie-in-the-sky ideas that I'll just list for the sake of the fact that they need to be said because people want them. But much like with the remaster video, I have no real hopes for these things. They're probably not going to get done. But yes, I would obviously pay full price. I would pay 2020 prices for a new Guild Wars 1 campaign. Obviously. Yes, I would pay for Utopia, which I was kind of lukewarm about for years until that new Guild Wars 2 art book somewhat canonized its existence a few years ago. Yes, I would pay for a sequel to the bonus mission pack. That's been an idea I've seen as kind of a good one. And it wouldn't even matter what stories it goes into. I heard there's a fun thing going on with WoW Classic at the moment, where WoW Classic has started introducing origin stories in new quests for villains that will appear in the main branch of the game later. That's kind of amazing. Imagine a Guild Wars 2 version of that with a new bonus mission pack. Yes, I would pay for that. I would pay for access to a single new god realm so that we can get more than just the Fissure of Woe and the Underworld at long last. And do you know what, actually, if ArenaNet sold some kind of farmable endgame, it's probably a really good idea, because content like that just keeps on giving. I would even pay for a new format entirely, like I just mentioned in the remaster video, some sort of single region DLC, you know, maybe an ore or whatever, as I'd mentioned. Cool. Point is, I would give money for Guild Wars 1. I will pay, even in the scenario where it's not cheap, and yet it's been made by kind of a smaller team, you know, it's not this full-fledged thing, I would pay. I do wonder if ArenaNet charging more for less in such a scenario wouldn't compare favourably at all with, like, Guild Wars 2's offerings, and maybe that's why that they don't do it. And it's kind of sad for me to realise, actually, saying this out loud, but I've got to be honest, I would happily pay over the odds for a Guild Wars 1 experience, while simultaneously, and perhaps hypocritically, I would judge something like Secrets of the Obscure for not being value for the money. I'm sure there's some psychology to that. Maybe it's something about the realization that for Guild Wars 1, it's this or nothing, as we've just lived through for the past 15 years. Or maybe it's because it's now obvious just how small, and I think as ArenaNet themselves put it in a recent statement, scrappy they are. So I feel like I'd be happier to support just for anything. You know, kind of like early era Path of Exile stuff, where they had a community very clearly in their corner because they were perceived as a small indie with supporter packs available for sale and stuff. But at the end of the day, I would pay for experiences that are satisfying, I really enjoy playing, and want more Guild Wars 1. That's the end of it. You'd be right to recognise that this is outside of the scope of an anniversary celebration, though. So I think it is too big for a 20th anniversary thing. I think the best thing we could hope for is the 20th anniversary would be like a watershed moment that marks the return of more significant active development. Now that I could get really behind, and that new development is monetized to justify its existence of a small team. That would be the dream, and it's about as far as I think it could stretch. On a similar note, by the way, if we're talking about finances, things we would buy for, I do want to point out that I probably wouldn't be paying for other kinds of microtransactions in this game. Perhaps you guys feel differently about this, but like, I still haven't bought a bunch of the bank tabs that they added. I don't view that stuff as value for money. Some kind of anniversary update that allowed me to buy even more. I mean, maybe if you're super into the game. And do you know what I especially am not excited about? Paying real-world money for costumes and cosmetics. I think a costume update would super disappoint me. I don't know about you guys, but the whole thing where it's like much of the income and therefore a chunk of the effort towards Guild Wars 2 goes purely into Fashion Wars cash shop experiences really fucking bums me out. I wouldn't pay for anything like that for whatsoever. Give me content and I'll pay. Other stuff, not so much. I'd rather actually farm those things in-game and get playtime out of them. So yeah, paid experiences, but let's be real, it's unlikely. So let's get some more realistic ideas in here. First, yeah, more cross-profession and unique items, such as exactly like those that came with the 15th anniversary. Like I said, I thought that that was a really good update. I don't really have much to add, except to say, give us more. Give us more weird weapons with weird requirements. There are a billion gaps and weird combos out there that they could play with. I love looking at the PvX wiki and fun, weird, off-meta builds where people are trying strange things out. And presumably, it's not too tricky for them to implement. Some of those gaps are kind of important too, like the fast casting shield. It feels a bit weird that none of the other casters have attribute requirement shields that they can use for stuff like that. Like, come on, Mesmer's already ridiculously overpowered, and then they got power crept more with an amazing shield set. And I'll return to that in a second. Another idea is adding new skins to the game. This one I'm a little bit wobbly about. Obviously, Guild Wars 1 has a big heritage of really cool looking skins that people want to go for. You have the old designer weapon contest, many of which are still popular to this day, where people actually go out and try and farm for them. But again, this is art stuff. And I think that creating assets in this game is like one of the biggest expenses and tricky things that they kind of have to work around. Just kind of the vibe I get. Like, if you look at the Balthazar set that they added, that's a Guild Wars 2 skin set, isn't it? They took it from the second game and imported it to the first. I mean, if they do that, then Jesus, they have a veritable treasure trove of loads of skins from the sequel, right? So maybe there is actually a lot of potential there. When it comes to implementing new skins, I really believe that what they should do is hide them in dungeon drop chests and, you know, change loot tables, rather than just, oh, I go get a token and then I get it and I'm guaranteed it really, really fast. I much think it's healthier to have stuff like the Bone Dragon Staff and the Frog Scepter, where the items incentivize a lot of fun farming and actually give people meaning to more playtime. Aspirational, fun, exciting items that you're really thrilled to see pop up in Kamadan or whatever. When we're talking purely about skins, not like stuff that you can use in Buildcraft, like with the attribute requirement weapons, that would be my preferred implementation, with a view to let's get as much fun and playtime out of as little as we can. But your mileage may vary. So, the next idea here, I've written return to Gen 7 minis. What I mean by this, and this is why I did the recap of everything that's happened at the start of this video. Remember what I just mentioned? For the 7th birthday gifts, you have a chance, a low chance, but a chance, to get as drops some previously totally exclusive, like, magazine and PvP reward minis. Items that were essentially nearly impossible for players to get, but now you actually have an avenue for them. Well, those are not the only exclusive minis. ArenaNet didn't do all of them. There are still some available. So here's a screenshot from Guild Wars Legacy forums of, like, just general price checks. I think it's a year old or so at this point, of the mini section. It's a really amazing project and thread for what it's worth. But here you can see, you get a general gist of how many minis there still are out there that maybe they could filter in. Obviously, not everything on this list is an exclusive mini, but the ones down below in the thousands of Ectos, most of those, yeah. And they don't have to do it that fast, for what it's worth. Instead of one anniversary update at the 20 years, and then we have to wait till 25 or something, they could initiate some kind of mechanism where every year now, another one of these minis gets added somehow or gets folded in. This is a really risky proposition, okay, I just want to say, because these minis, I mean, look at the prices. Are like the panda and stuff. These are so iconic. They are ultra rare, aspirational items. And the truth is, I kind of don't want to tamper with that too much. I genuinely feel like these rare items in Guild Wars 1 are far more magical and exciting than any infusion or ultra rare I've seen in Guild Wars 2. So I want to preserve that. And I remember specifically with the 7th birthday being a little bit worried that they'd ruin, say, the Naga and some of those other things that got implemented. On the other hand, they did okay on the 7th birthday. They didn't make them too common. They're still worth a lot of money. It's just that, you know, now they're actually in the realms of acquisition somehow. You once again will have this thing where you're kind of excited when your birthday comes around because maybe you've got a chance. So a similar treatment, if they've done it in the past already, they kind of have set up a precedent that some of these other ultra rares may one day also be available through another acquisition method. I know if you're one of, like, the 2 guys that's still actively playing and has one of these, that's going to feel kind of bad. But, I don't know. I think this might be an okay idea. I'm mixed on it, but something about it feels right. And as a tack-on to this, another big conversation that's going on now is the Prophecies Collector's Edition bonus stuff. Not many people have Prophecies Collector's Edition. It's very rare. And you kind of get some cool exclusive stuff there. People are liking the idea of bringing those up. I actually had a comment on the remaster video about this. I didn't realize just how insane the culture's got about these. People are going to eBay these days and spending insane amounts of money, real life money, on old copies of Prophecies in the hopes that there'll be a code there. Even scratching the stuff off to reveal the code, I think now, because the cards are so ancient, you need, like, specific strategies and methods for getting it off safely, and it's different on the EU versus the NA one. Like, it's wild, some of the stuff that's going on, just because people want these Prophecies collectors things. So an alternate path to those. Again, does it spoil the idea of the whole thing, or does it just open it up a bit? I mean, we're in the game's twilight years, maybe we open it up a bit. I also wonder with regard to this, since they sold, like, collector's edition bonuses and stuff, are they not technically beholden to keeping them exclusive through that way? Is that a thing, legally? Speaking of weird exclusive stuff as well, what about the ultra obscure things like the Burger King Korean shield or the Coke items? Yeah, Guild Wars has a lot of strange stuff out there. And then a third little tack on in this little trinity of ideas here. Well, we have the 7th birthday. What about the 8th? They experimented for that one birthday, the idea of everlasting tonics. Well, what about another suite of everlasting tonics? And again, with the rates tweaked a little bit so that they'll be fun and exciting as the years go along. I see that as perfectly within reach. Oh, actually, I'll give you another tack on as far as items are concerned. This one's kind of personal to me. I haven't really seen people talking about this online. But, like, new QOL items for more bag space and stuff. I know I just said I wouldn't be excited about paying real-world money for more generalized storage tabs. But I have to be honest, one of the main things that I'm actually doing as I play Guild Wars 1 these past few weeks is I'm earning Z coins. I'm doing, you know, the Zaitian dailies and bounties and stuff, specifically to get coins for the improved runes of holding and stuff, which I totally forgot existed and never actually got on my main. So I'm looking to expand my bags and I'm having fun with it. So, you know, if the anniversary extends that even a little bit further, so each bag and belt pouch eventually can be as big as your backpack, I'd be all for it. I don't know what other kind of QOL items they might be able to do along these lines. Maybe you guys have some ideas. Something more, moving on from items now, something more significant that I'm especially excited about was something, again, I mentioned in the remaster video, and it's like, well, hey, why not just put this in the regular game? What about a proper Ironman title? As I say, people are really into the Ironman thing now. It's very doable, and having like a real in-game status symbol for having pulled it off would be excellent. Adding a single title like this would add so much playtime for anyone who actually wants to go for it. I see it as a very, very massive win, incredibly efficient. Someone on Reddit talking about this recently as well mentioned that, you know, the game already has like the free trial mode, which already disables trade and whatnot. So there's possibly some code in there or some examples of how it could actually work. There would be a little bit more, obviously, with the implementation on this, but it's not art. Just another title track, kind of like Survivor, except you only get it if you've played through the game without trading or using your bank or whatever. You know, they could also do a thing where you get another title if you have Survivor and Ironman. That would be totally badass. I'm actually on the cusp right now of saying, oh my god, I'd do a stream and video series on it, but hey, you never know where we'll be in a year if and when such a thing came out, but it would be very cool, wouldn't it? Probably the biggest, most exciting, and most realistic idea you're going to find in this entire long, rambling video is more new skills. Just as I've suggested, they could do more of what they did at the 15th anniversary, or the 10th, or the 7th, or the 8th. It stands to reason more skills, which came in with the 15th and was such a big hit last time around, could be done again. I would like a couple of tweaks. One kind of issue with the new skills that came for the 15th anniversary is that they're not available year-round unless you find someone who has the item already. It's just a little bit weird. I don't think the idea of adding new, like, super elites, let's face it, that only have a tiny window to collect if you're playing around April, perhaps to insulate them from running over the mare. I'm not really sure why ArenaNet did this. I don't think that was a good idea. It just feels a bit awkward and weird. I would like any other new skills they add to just be you know, acquirable anywhere you like, anytime you like, rather. I'm also open to having more skills than just 10 elites, but maybe they're not elites. Like, maybe we do 3 skills this time per class, but they're not elites, they're just regulars. I think that's a lot safer, because if some of them are kind of rubbish and whiff, you haven't sort of screwed an entire class, like with the Ellie example. Like, they would have other options to try out. And yeah, regular skills aren't quite so build defining, so maybe they can't have so much power in them, but regular skills have more opportunity to slot into your other builds and other playstyles and be new toys you can actually use. You can even, you know, combo the toys together. And if they're PvE only skills, which I think is highly likely they would be, because we don't want to tamper with PvP balance here, then PvE skills have the 3 only cap, right? They can be stronger, they can be build defining. Look at a button like save yourselves. So yeah, a few new strong PvE skills. I've always enjoyed the fact that because heroes can't use PvE skills as well, there's more incentive to play with other people, so you get more power, basically. You know, nowadays, if you want to do a Z quest with someone and they're a paragon, you're really excited because it means you're going to get heroic refrain. And yeah, I lose the quality of having my heroes I can run all the time, but it's a reason to socialize. Keep going for that stuff, I think it's great. And if they're going this route, what I think would be the best place to actually put these skills is in the existing reputation trees. Like, there are almost no Sunspear skills, there's barely any, right? Or Kurzik or Luxon skills. I always feel sad when I look at their categories when you're sorting by attributes and they're just sitting there alone in the skill UI. So let's put some more of those in, right? Hell, some new Kurzik or Luxon abilities would probably cascade outwards into a bunch of new activity at the Jade Quarry and Fort Aspenwood and AB and the Vanquishes in the area as people want to actually tier them up, you know? Last time a bunch of the skills, you know, and those weapons, they all had this big, like, Guild Wars 2 referential stuff. So why not do that again if that's important to them? Like, put them in, say, the Asura tree or the Norn tree. That actually has the advantage of being multi-profession as well if they do the EOTN reputations, which, again, insulates us against this issue of maybe if one of them's kind of weak or whatever. Well, look, all professions get to use these this time. Nobody's really locked out. Though then you do have the risk there of it affecting even more than the meta you like. You wouldn't want to recreate Ursenway, for example. So yeah, new skills I think is a really good idea, and out of everything here, this is the one I think we might see more than anything else. That doesn't stop us dreaming though, and here's another idea. This again came from the remaster video. Wow, I can't believe I didn't mention this. This is brilliant. A weapon mods trader. Okay, wait, if you're a little bit out of the loop with Guild Wars 1, you might think, is that really fun? No, this is a fantastic idea. Did you guys ever notice how you can buy insignias for your heroes and runes for your heroes really, really easily because there's the traders and the outposts? Sure, some of them get expensive. You've got a choice whether you want to go for the expensive options or not. But you can't do that for inscriptions. There is no trader for shield hands or scythe snafes or staff wrappings. All these things are really tedious and cumbersome to get, especially if you're out of the loop and you haven't been playing for a while, or if you're a new player, because you have to meticulously and carefully salvage and keep everything you find like a pat rack in a game with very limited inventory spaces, very limited storage, and the items don't even stack, right? You either do that, or you spend ages looking for sellers in Camadan. There is no vendor for weapon upgrades, and that may have made sense in past iterations of the game, you know, back before Heroes, or when we only had 3, but in the modern game, people are not just setting up their own builds and their own weapon sets, but they're setting up loads of them for all of their heroes too. It's kind of a super pain in the ass. Like, if you're going to build a bunch of Mesmers with Domination 40/40 sets, the easiest way to do that is to go to the crafters in Cantha, but if you do that, you don't really get to easily play with the skins, and that's a cool facet of customizing how your heroes look and stuff, but it's just too tedious, let alone, and that's just for your main character, let alone doing it for multiple characters on your one account. Like, I can just about to be bothered to do it for my Mesmer here in this footage, no one else. And it's a shame, because there's a lot of fun to be had in Guild Wars 1 when it comes to weapons and weapon swapping. Like, the footage in this build, I have a heavy scythe head, which increases my weakness duration, which I cast on my shield set as I'm initially aggroing using the Norn shout, "You're all weaklings," so I extend that. I'm kind of tanky as I aggro them. Then I quickly swap to my 40/40, and I start doing big damage. I have my high energy set there for when I get low on energy. My spear and shield for if I start taking high pressure or I go against these elementals. Like, I've got it all elemental attuned so that, you know, I can resist these crazy new Ellie abilities out there. And it's all really good fun. But my god, was it tedious to set up, bartering and haggling and spending loads of ecto and getting all this stuff. Most players miss out. A weapon mod trader, just like the rune trader, would fix so much of this. I do see the downside that creates a little bit less barter in Camadan, which is one of the main things that makes the game feel alive, but I fully believe there are other things people would continue to trade, like Z-keys and coins and arm braces and rare skins and minis and so on. Not to mention the fact that even if you put a trader there, the rates on the trader merchants tend to be poor anyway, so people continue to trade outside of them for deeper discounts, just like how people still trade black dyes and whatever, which actually are kind of broken in the game at the moment, and that might be nice to fix in an anniversary patch now that I mention it. It was mentioned to me last night on my Discord that a potential complication might be the fact that, unlike insignias, which are just, you know, flat bonuses, weapon mods and inscriptions, like, have scaling strengths. Like, you might get a weak one, or you might get a good perfect one or whatever, and that might mean that the vendor's a little bit trickier to set up, but I think it can be done anyway. And what other complications are there? I mean, that they'd have to add the actual vendors physically to the maps around the world. Is that really such a big problem? Was it a nightmare when they added those Aishan mission guys to all the campaign outposts before? Or the festival hat makers to LA, Camadan, and Kaineng? You know, it's happened before. I think it should happen again. I would love that. Another huge and exciting topic here is that of heroes that were henchmen. So, heroes in prophecies. Well, that's kind of a big thing, right? The point being that if you are a new player and you go back to prophecies, you are reliant on those henchmen, which are often very weak, or, you know, are traps. Like, if you use Reyna, she's really not very good, for example. And instead, what if we just gave people heroes even back in prophecies that they can customize and they can be stronger? Now, I made the case in my remaster video that I don't actually think this is super necessary, and I think giving people heroes when they first start playing the game is kind of bad advice. Actual first-time new players, you know, they're just getting used to their own class. They have nothing unlocked. They have no money to gear heroes. It's not really the power bump that I think the veterans think there is. And, you know, in Guild Wars 1, a big fantasy when you start is, oh, you've picked your main and you've picked your secondary and you feel special about the combo and you're getting to grips with it. Suddenly being thrown a bunch of skills from all the other classes on other heroes kind of tampers with that fantasy, I think. It works better when they're a little bit more hands-off and a little bit more out of sight and heroes come later in the day. This was one of the problems with release Nightfall. With all of that said, I think because so much of the game these days, especially when you hit hard mode, is about having fun with heroes, having fun gearing them, giving them different outfits, seeing how good they are at using various skills, learning how to flag them in battle. Stuff like that is kind of the essence of the game, really. And it does make a lot of sense to teach people this stuff in Prophecies and in Cantha 2. They kind of feel weird for not having heroes. I do, and it especially feels weird, by the way, that you have no heroes and then you randomly hit Lion's Arch and suddenly Mox is standing there and the first hero you unlock is a level 20 dervish. Like, that's ridiculous. So actually, I'm pretty game for this. Give it a bit of a delay after the start of the game, then let players unlock heroes throughout early Cantha and early Prophecies. You know, maybe when you beat the Great Northern Wall, you get a hero. Maybe after Fort Rannick, you get a hero. Trickle it out a little bit so the learning curve and it's not too overwhelming, and I think it really works. On a practical level, what this would do for people who are at endgame as well is give them more options for more build comps, because now they have access to, say, an additional Mesmer from Dunham, or they have a new Necro from Claude, or they can do, you know, a Ranger Petway thing because they can get Raynor with them now. And I do admit, I would love to gear all these guys out. I'd love to give them builds. Another option here is to not do all the henchmen. I mean, seriously, think about factions. There are so many henchmen over there. Don't turn them all into heroes. Leave them as is, warts and all for the early game, but take the later game characters and make them heroes. Particularly, I'm talking about the iconics here. Menlo, Devonna, Sin, Aiden, and Eve. Those guys I would love to have on my team. And in the old days, it was kind of a topic about how they should act as separate entities on their own adventures and then all 100% the same as you. But come on, getting those as heroes, that would be a great 20th anniversary update. One complication I can kind of see is that if you have them as heroes, well, they're still henchmen in the maps as well, right? So what are we going to do here? We've got duplicates. Do we remove the henchmen? Let people double up? I think doubling up is probably fine. Like, just give them a name for when they're double up. Similar to how if you have two Melonis, you know, in a questing area, she becomes the Sunspear Dervish or whatever. Same thing here. It might look a bit clunky in an outpost where I can add Alessia, the hero, and she's available for recruitment as a henchman, and they have the same name there. But aside from looking slightly unprofessional or weird, I don't think it's a big deal at all. There's also the possible issue of mercenaries. So currently, people have an economic incentive to buy mercenary heroes so that they can access more Mesmers or whatever. But if they follow through with this proposal, and we just get a bunch of them in the base game, that economic incentive goes away a bit. So now we're putting an update in that causes Guild Wars to earn less money from the tryhards. Maybe on those grounds they don't do it. But honestly, fuck all that, man. I don't want to live in the world where even the most basic of cool, fun ideas get binned over stuff like that. Mercenaries will always have value regardless. They offer even more duplicate possibilities. Like, what if I want to have an entire set of E-Surge Mesmers geared up and ready to go, and I want to have a bunch of, like, for a fragility comp or something? It's annoying to keep swapping the builds, so, you know, just give me more. They have value there, and they're providing the fantasy of having heroes that are literally characters elsewhere on your account, that you can customize how they look and all that. They would still sell on those grounds. I say go for it. So, rounding out the video here, I've kind of got two big more topics. But I also want to mention this one before we run into it, because I see a lot of conversation about it online, and I have to say I'm not too into it. And that's the idea of pre-searing updates. So recently, for example, on the Guild Wars 1 subreddit, there's a thread about this idea of the anniversary update. And people are talking about the idea of adding heroes to pre, or a PvP arena to pre, or whatever. I personally say no. I already find it kind of crazy that there's been as many updates as there are at Pre, and I know it's a place where there's a high population, lots of people hang out, but you know, they got their daily quests and all that. Look, it's a special and wonderful location for its timelessness, for its tranquility. It doesn't need anything else, I don't think. There are already those like insane purple char drops that people can grind for and play around with. There's that crazy cool idea of getting the People Know Me title in there, you know, 10 max titles in Pre. Maybe I can be convinced that there's some small vendor or something that could be added for a big benefit in Pre-searing, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Is Pre really a big deal for the 20th anniversary? So I want to talk about the idea of a balance patch. If you're out of the loop, Guild Wars 1 doesn't get balance patches at all anymore. Hasn't really for years. Now, the devs used to talk about ideas that they had for upcoming balance reworks, In the last one they did, for example, with the Ellie, they added these cool double cast skills, which clearly they plan to expand more of. Like, there's only one double cast per attunement right now, and sadly that never happened. They had comments about wanting Monk's smiting prayers and Paragon, like, motivation line, particularly improvements too. And some people are still really hung up on those ideas. They really want to see them, and fairly so, I think, because those attribute lines, especially motivation, are really in the dumps. You know, during the game's heyday, Monk was like the golden child, and now Monk really kind of feels a bit iffy in PvE, and I'd like to see that rectified one day. The studio line on this is that they don't do skill updates anymore because they don't want to inexpertly tamper with things, which, fair enough, sounds reasonable. If you have just one or two guys adding updates in almost what looks like their free time that literally don't really have a clue about where to start with the balance, maybe they shouldn't be doing things. Guild Wars 1 had this slightly more delicate situation too, where improvements to player skills improves the monsters as well. So they need at least some grasp on how various changes they make might affect various PvE areas. And I'd guess they have no playtesters for this kind of stuff anymore, which again is sad. I'd love to playtest this stuff. And I can especially understand not wanting to tamper with PvP. I think it is incredibly cool that they clearly still care about having a balance there. I mean, Christ, some of the regular QOL patches we just had were to address the botting and sort of malicious reporting that was going on in PvP to preserve that mode. Now, that's awesome. So, that's the one case. On the other hand, I can't help but feel a mindset like that of non-tampering is somewhat empty and pointless in a world post the 15-year skill update. An update where what happened? A few awesome and crazy uneven skills got added to the game, shifted some of the meta, and it was fine. It was actually the best update in years. And we've had years since then now to reflect back on the fact that that was awesome. And it was because the smallest little taste of a bit of balance. So yeah, I want more stuff like that. It doesn't have to be new skills. It can just be tweaking any of the 1,000 initial skills that are already there. Obviously, there's a bit of risk here, but every change they make will have a bit of risk, and the potential gains here are so worth it. It's not, and I want to be very clear about this, it's not like Guild Wars 1 is in some absolutely immaculate, shining, perfect example of balance right now. Actually, Guild Wars 1, as it currently stands right now, and I'm very happy to say this, especially if you guys take a bit of a break and then you look back at it, is not balanced well at all. It sort of blows my mind just how shitty and underwhelming most skills actually are. It's that thing where if you actively play and spend too long with a product, you kind of get acclimated to all of its shitty elements and stop thinking about it. But really, guys, Guild Wars 1 is not something, and I'm talking purely about PvE balance right here. I want to be clear, I'm not discussing PvP whatsoever, and I do believe in an idea of leaving that as it is. But PvE could do so much better. And what would that mean, really, right? Just one balance patch a year? A bit of a balance attached to these anniversary updates, followed by some quick cleanup hotfixes immediately following. Is that really so bad? The anniversary balance patches, something like that? Think about it. So when it comes to what I would actually want prioritized if they did consent to start doing balance patch stuff, first, yeah, underwhelming attribute lines for sure, and elite skills in those lines. Monks and Paragons being at the very front of the line. And then, yeah, maybe some speculative wildcard updates on some of the totally dead skills that have been left in just an awful state because they were only relevant for a PvP meta years and years and years ago, right? So, yes, this would change monster balance. The 15-year anniversary update, sticking entirely to new skills that weren't found on monsters, very cleverly sidestepped that. If they're doing real balance, they can't do that. But again, I don't think it's a huge concern. Think back to that final Elementalist update. That turbocharged huge swathes of Elementalist mobs and bosses throughout the game, hardcore turning most early bosses into ridiculous nukes you have to be very careful of. And what happened there? Well, people adapted. People had fun adapting. They experienced something fresh across the entire game. You know what I think when I consider the fact that a Spear Mastery line buff might improve the Paragon bosses around Eye of the North and Nightfall next year? I think bring it on. That'd be really fun. I'd like to see them do a little bit more than just be a loot pinata. The only areas that the devs really have to be cautious of are like the super early game sections. Like, be careful around Shinji Monastery, you know, those places maybe want a little bit of a check. Don't turbocharge the Grawl in Old Ascalon too much. They might also want to be a little bit considerate of the end game hard areas because there's like a long culture of people having certain expectations of how those areas are played. But even there, you know, these places are meant to be a challenge. If they get more challenging, how is that a controversy? And aside from that, people will teach each other how things work, and, you know, especially if this was combined with Henchman Hero Update, people will have the power to get through, and it's not like they don't struggle as the game currently is. I mean, I literally was reading a post just the other day about someone struggling to get through the Frost Gate with Henchmen. So one thing I would invite you guys to talk about in the comments is I'd love to hear what kind of like little skill and balance updates you would like to do yourself. Obviously we could sit here talking all day about it, so I will try not to in this video. We just mentioned Ellie a second ago. A personal dream of mine would actually be to give scaling armor penetration to Overcast. So the more Overcast you are, the more armor pen you get. I've read a lot of proposals in the community recently about how useful armor pen would be for improving that class's performance in PvE, while also actually still preserving the interesting armor weaknesses and resistances system, instead of just bypassing it completely with armor ignoring damage. Ellies really need that armor pen to be competitive against like level 28 mobs with super high armor values. And I think tying it to Overcast would create this really cool ramp effect where they steadily hit harder and harder as the fight goes along, which is a bit different to some of the other classes. And speaking of this armor stuff, what I will say that I think the game desperately needs as a broader thing that could come in with a balance initiative is a look at the armor ignoring damage situation. That's like the main thing that's made Guild Wars 1 feel very broken. You know, looking back at this with fresh eyes, it's so obvious that it's not right that some classes nearly arbitrarily are bypassing half of the mechanics in the game to do obscene damage, and for what reason? Because their skills arbitrarily didn't have a damage type assigned to them? So like Necro, for example, most of those, I would get rid of nearly every armor ignoring ability in the game, frankly. Necro should be having cold or shadow damage, and especially Mesmer skills, which are always armor ignoring, and maybe because we were attacking their emotions and this was an early prophecies idea or something, let's face it, these skills should be chaos damage. It's absolutely insane how much pressure I'm doing in this footage in the background, with fast casts, low energy costs, quick recharges, while armor respecting classes have so much more to work on and get a pittance of damage in exchange. Like, look at the skill Obsidian Flame on Ellie. It specifically, as a function of the skill, says this is a perk, it's armor ignoring, it's a feature, and it comes with huge costs. You get Overcast casting Obsidian Flame. Meanwhile, like, Mesmers are just getting this benefit on everything because why? It's pretty broken. I mean, look at this. These screenshots from the Ellie patch, from the horse's mouth itself. This is ArenaNet writing this in the last patch that came out. They said, this update is making some changes to skills on other professions that were dealing armor ignoring damage. Because of the higher armor in hard mode, these skills often meant that elementalists are displaced as damage dealers. And by the way, not just Ellies, everyone. They're only talking about Ellies here because that was the theme of that patch. While we feel these professions should be able to do damage, the amount of armor ignoring damage they're dealing is far higher than reasonable. Then they go on to list these, and they're mostly like Rit skills. They were just starting this initiative, and all the massive outliers that they never got to, well, guess which ones just ran over the meta the past 10 years. Basically, one of the patches immediately prior to this had been a Mesmer update, which improved like fast casting and access to a lot of this damage, and they were clearly reticent to immediately step back on some of that. They wanted to give people time to enjoy it. Well, we've had time. It's been a long old while now. 10 years of Mesmer domination over that in Guild Wars 1, and hey, we have Virtuoso domination in Guild Wars 2 as well to match now. And yes, they started the initiative with reducing hard mode armor, but there's still the fact that most high-level enemies just flat out have too much armor still. Either that, or we would like more access to armor pen, and I bring you back to my Overcast idea a second ago. That's ArenaNet themselves talking about this. Seriously, my utter dream for a really valuable balance patch would be, I would be themed the armor patch. And it would simply implement a couple of like uniform changes. First, it would go over the skills that have forgotten or don't have a damage type actually assigned to them, so they're currently armor ignoring, and just give them a damage type. That's all, don't change the numbers or anything. And then second, go to the different families of enemies, you know, so like how gargoyles are supposed to be to cold, is it? They're resistant to lightning. And add a couple of new weaknesses in there. Like, nothing currently resists chaos whatsoever in the game. Currently, nothing resists shadow or is weak to shadow. Like, they're essentially pointless values in the game right now that the devs actually have a quote, I think somewhere on the wiki, where they admit, yeah, nothing checks for these. Actually put those in. So yeah, you can still play as your crazy hardcore DPS Mesmer Brigade, but only in certain places where the enemies are weak to chaos. There are other builds and playstyles that will shine in these other areas because, hey, we have fire damage and these guys have shadow. It would also, as a perk, put Dervish into an interesting place because each of its avatars gives you different damage types and half of them are irrelevant. Well, they would no longer be irrelevant. I would love a patch. Just doing that, it would really make the build craft shine for me. Yeah, balance. I want it, and I want to hear what you guys would do if you could have some little balance changes in there. Those kind of comments are always so fascinating. One final topic, and it's a kind of big one. It gets talked about a lot on the internet, so I feel like it should be here in this video. And it's an ambitious one as well, and it's the idea of another tier of hard mode. So I've read this idea so often, and usually quite dismissive of it, because at first it comes across as just like one of these ridiculously ambitious, over-the-top things that will never happen. So what we're talking about is like a Guild Wars legendary mode. You know, you got normal, you got hard, and then you do something extra beyond that once you've beaten hard mode. And naturally, people get giddy about it. If you think about Guild Wars as like ARPG similarities and how ARPGs do features like this, you know, it's not too far-fetched. My thoughts are, of course, if we can imagine a world where it would happen, yes, it would be amazing. Such a mode would add epic amounts instantly of extra playtime as people swarm back to the game to go back through. They would vanquish everywhere again, they would do their campaigns, they would meet up with their guildies again. This one thing, without actually adding a new campaign or whatever, or even doing anything with art at all, it kind of brings everyone back to Guild Wars 1 for at least, you know, a few months, more likely years. And it would also be kind of that soft reset thing where everyone's got like a fresh progression. We all begin in the new mode and we're going through again. Yes, that would all be amazing, right? Easily we can say that would be amazing. But is it realistic? To play devil's advocate, here's how maybe they could get it in. First, you got to consider they would have to make like a new button for to the right of the hard mode button for in towns and outposts on the party window. And so you need a new set of icons for that. You need a new set of icons for all of the missions and like the vanquish areas. That's actual art and UX stuff, which, as I've said over and over, is probably the real challenge here. But it is kind of minimal. There's not actually that much there. They could bypass all of that and do it in a janky quest style setup, like we saw in the War in Kryta or the Winds of Change. Like in Winds of Change, you have that weird Memories of quest in Kaineng, which you collect that quest and it changes all the spawns to be the old spawns, or you remove the quest and you get the new spawns. Maybe they could do a quest type thing here, which is how they affect the legendary spawns or something. But I really wouldn't want that. My dream of it would be, look, you got to add the new button. You got to have it as an actual proper mode. Assuming they can get through that, well, maybe it's doable. For actual difficulty, there are a lot of things to consider that they could do. First, you've got enemy levels. I personally think a harder hard mode would have higher enemy levels, just for the cosmetics of it, if anything else. You know, there's that April Fool's quest where you're fighting the level 40 Apache helicopter. I think that's amazing. But again, with armor scaling mechanics, as they currently work, I wouldn't really recommend them going much higher, because it's going to make this armor ignoring issue even worse. So they would probably need the balance tweak in there as well or something. I think a very realistic thing they can do actually would be the disabling of consumables in this harder mode. Perhaps not all consumables, because those economies should matter and it's kind of fun to eat the eggs and so on and the red rock candy. But specifically, what I wouldn't want to see in a difficulty mode like that is death penalty removing consumables, stuff that gives you morale boosts. I think those things just remove all tension and skill from vanquishing, because hey, you make a mistake, you just eat a bunch of cons and you go again, and you just slowly pick the enemies off and you go again and again and again, and it's kind of lame, you know. I think a really difficult mode, and we are talking about the hardest difficulty, aren't we, would restore that idea that if everyone hits 60% DP, you get kicked. I think that's cool. And for what it's worth, maybe disabling the res scroll from Eye of the North item, that thing's pretty broken too. Now, a common suggestion for legendary mode that some of you guys have suggested is to tweak all their skill bars. Obviously, a big reason why current hard mode is fun and so different is because a bunch of enemies who previously wouldn't have had elite skills will now get them, and it really has a massive and very evident impact on how the content plays out. So you guys say, oh, well, let's update all their skill bars. I think that's unrealistic. Updating all the bars in the game to make them all a little scarier, like the War in Kryta and Winds of Change stuff, I mean, come on, that's just way too much work. It took a lot of expertise as well, and a lot of clear, careful understanding of the game's meta from a time of active development to get those really amazing Winds of Change enemies. I'm not sure we're there anymore. So I think that's not right, but, because we're talking about the entire game, but what is credible is maybe the blanket canvassing of adding extra skills. And hear me out here, this is going to sound pretty gimmicky, maybe enemies just gain another elite in the new mode. So basically enemy, and this does happen sometimes in the game, enemies have 2 elite skills on their bars now. By doing that, there wouldn't have to be that much expertise or thought that goes into what they are, just something from the same attribute line that the enemy's using. But it would create a whole host of novel situations, some extremely dangerous mobs, especially bosses, and, you know, some real monsters and fun things. So putting more elite skills on enemies, I think, is a very, very simple way of making quite a captivating legendary mode without going too hardcore with a bunch of other stuff. And, you know, as well, if you've ever played Guild Wars 1, you've dreamed of, oh, what if I could have 2 elites on my 1 bar? Well, you could witness some enemies actually doing that. That would be pretty cool, I think. And don't let me understate this, by the way. 2 elite skills on, like, some classes, like a monk that has 2 now, a monk boss or something. Like, that's going to be hard to get through. But it wouldn't be impossible. It would mean that your builds change. Perhaps it takes a while for people to find reliable strats. That's part of the fun. Rewards for this new mode would have to be considered too, and again we have the art issue. I think a couple of very simple title tracks would be brilliant. One for completing the campaigns, one for completing Vanquishing, so you get to go back and do those and rep those new titles. A new tier of chest and lockpick, which are kind of dropping higher rates, maybe more likely to get tomes, maybe some new quality of life items, like maybe this is where the new bags of holding or something can come from. I think that would be pretty meaningful too. And folding in another thing from this very video, and you can see why I've saved this for last now. Do you know what would be really cool for the new difficulty mode to drop? Think back to those anniversary weapon sets with the strange weapon type requirement combos. They're really fun items. Well, what if in this new mode, we've just changed the loot table so that can happen more regularly? New stuff will be dropping there, and now all year round, all around the game world, instead of just at the anniversary for a few tokens at Embark Beach, you're getting amazing, weird, quirky new items. Like perhaps this is where the Coke items are dropping. And frankly, maybe even exclusive minis and tonics, now that I mention it. But basically fun weapons with weird perks in the loot tables so they can be paired with any number of skins. What about stuff like those anniversary envoy casting staffs that have, like, what is it, a 10% higher value for half skill cast time than anything else in the game? Well, if they've opened the idea of stuff like that, let's have them being rare loot in a mode like this. Or what if you like the idea of a flat bow with a caster requirement so you do a little bit more damage while pulling? And now almost anything dropping as you play through this mode might end up super valuable. You know this shield that I've had and I'm so excited about in this footage? It's kind of cool, but you know, that's the only shield I can get. It has to be that skin. What if in this new hard mode now, I can get, you know, a demonic Aegis that has a fast casting or a domination requirement or something? Weapon type, requirement, skin attached, the world's your oyster. Go out there and have fun in the new difficulty mode. And again, there's no new art or anything involved with that, and it would please the hell out of the diehards, who are the people who would be in the harder mode. That's about as much of a devil's advocate as I can be. We're talking about a lot of content, after all. I mean, maybe, and I think this would be more credible, they can release it steadily, like just one campaign at a time. Just do the new difficulty mode in prophecies first. You just do the prophecies patch, and then later on you do the factions. You can split this into 4 and slowly progress along. You know, I was just talking about how exciting that would be for everyone to progress together. Imagine that, 2026 is the prophecies patch, and everyone's excited, and that was the year of prophecies, and you kind of track along how it originally released. You know, 2027 is factions year. That would not only give them time to actually implement each bit modularly, but it would kind of be a feature all in its own. But yeah, I dream, just as in the remaster video. This is probably all very silly to think about, and for what it's worth, a new difficulty mode, I know a lot of people talk about it with the anniversary conversations. That's too big for an anniversary release, guys. Let's be real, that's a proper update. That's something I think they should announce as its own thing, and it would have its own trailer, a trailer which would totally, by the way, make the rounds on MMO websites, and so on. Again, the best I would hope for is that the 20th anniversary marks the start of some new updates, the beginning of a team that will work on the game. Then maybe way down the line, you could look at stuff like this. And so yeah, we've circled back to Pie in the Sky ideas. I think that's my cue to stop talking. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the 20th anniversary, which things you think might show up. I really enjoyed the feedback and the chat on the last video, guys. A little bit of indulgence in this old game is always fun. Thank you very, very, very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Man, right after setting this video up, I'm now reading all this stuff about a Guild Wars 3 announcement leak thing. Ugh, gonna have to go see what that's all about now.